This episode of Geniuses of Copywriting is proudly sponsored by the GaryHalbertLetter.com. In the modern world of copywriting, all roads lead to Gary Halbert, and at the GaryHalbertLetter.com you will find the free issues of his newsletter, which has inspired and helped thousands of copywriters hone their skills and become better sales writers.
Welcome to the Geniuses of Copywriting podcast, a peek into the minds and strategies of the world's greatest copywriters, marketers, and persuasion experts. And now, here's your host, Brian Casangina.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Geniuses of Copywriting podcast. It's my true honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Joe Vitale to the call today. Thank you for coming on. And how are you today?
I'm great. I've actually been looking forward to this call. You know why? Because I still love copywriting. That's where it all began for me. And these days, people want me to talk about self-help and spirituality and law of attraction and the secret. But inside, there's a live, burning copywriter. So right. I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to give you a bit of background on Dr. Vitale, for those who don't already know, he's gone from homeless, and now he's a copywriting legend. He's president of the Napoleon Hill Institute. He's an author of over 90 books, star of over 30 movies. We'll come back to that later as well. And we're not talking about the hit movie The Secret that he was in. Joe is a musician with an amazing 15 albums. And as a musician myself, that's certainly an incredible thing. He received the US President Lifetime Achievement Award. That's a mouthful right there, last year, which is incredible. And Los Angeles Tribune Lifetime Achievement Award in 2021. So congrats on those. Joe, you've helped millionaires and billionaires, royalty and presidents. And this is something that I've seen you post about in the past as well. At the age of 71, you began MMA training, which is incredible. Right. So let's back up on some of that. And I'd love to know how you got started in the business, and I'd love to hear that story.
Which business?
There's so many, isn't there?
Right. Which business? I can tell you this, Brian. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an author when I was a teenager. I went through that period when I thought about what do I want to be in my life? And baseball player, and magician, and actor, and attorney, and private detective, all these things that a kid might fantasize about. But I looked around and I was surrounded by books because I was going to the public library. I was devouring them, and books were my friend. Books were my escape. Books were my entertainment. Books were my education. And I thought, I should write books. And so I decided early on to do it, but I was in no way, shape, or form an overnight success. As you mentioned there briefly, I did go through homelessness. I was in poverty for 10 years. And all during that time, I was trying to be an author. I was trying to be published. And I did have moments. I had a play produced in 1979. I was broke before it, broke after it, came and went. And nobody even knows about it until I mention it like today. First book wasn't until 1984. It also came and went. It was called Zen and the Art of Writing. Publisher didn't know about marketing, and I, at that time, did not know about marketing. But that, in many ways, was a turning point because I deep dived into marketing, became a self-educated marketer, learned about copywriting, which I didn't know what that was beforehand. I didn't know that that was a subject. I thought a copyright was what you got with the government, and your document right. book was copyrighted. But I didn't know that there was a vocation called copywriting. And so I deep dived into that as well. And then, we pick up speed, and there's all kinds of things that happen. I do become a copywriter. I do invent a different kind of copywriting, mostly from a marketing maneuver to separate myself from the pack. And I invented Hypnotic Writing, which also became my first ebook, which also became one of my most popular books, which also brought a lot of copywriting clients to me because they had a choice between 5 different copywriters, and I was the one who invented Hypnotic Writing. They wanted that guy. They wanted a Hypnotic Writing guy. And, I can keep talking. I can say that I was one of the first to be on the internet, considered an internet copywriter when nobody knew what that was. Yeah. It was in the mid-1990s. And I wrote a book called Cyber Writing, which was a book on how to write copy that sells and didn't get you, the buzzword then was flamed, didn't get you flamed in the 1990s. And of course, I kept going, kept writing, kept starting to get more publications, started to get more known as a marketer. And along the way, there were some more synchronicities that led to me being invited to be in the movie The Secret. And I can just keep narrating and keep talking because this is a long journey. I am in my 70s at this point, and I've had milestones and twists and turns and all kind of plot twists and character interruptions and everything else. So I'll pause to see where you want to go.
Well, there's so many directions that we could go, to be honest. I
Right.
mean, you've done so much with your life. Like, if anyone could live a tenth of the life that you have, it would be pretty amazing. One of the things that you reminded me about when you were talking was the Hypnotic Writing book, and that's one
Yes.
of the very first books that I read on the subject of copywriting. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what year it was, but I started out in 2003. I was looking for information on how to start a mail order business. I bought a course. I discovered the internet back then, so I was a relatively late picker up of that.
Yeah.
And it was stuff from Dan Kennedy, John Carlton, Mal Emery was a guy in Australia, and they all recommended some of your books, including Hypnotic Writing. So that's something that I've always tried to sort of introduce in my own copywriting, these hypnotic writing patterns. So
Mhm.
can you tell us a bit more about that for the readers who haven't seen the book?
Yeah, that's an important conversation because there's a lot of lessons in that. First of all, I realized that I was not the only copywriter available. We want to pause there because we all think we're the best and we're
Right.
good and everything else, but we all have competition. And so I realized I needed to stand out from the competition. How was I going to stand out? I needed something the competition did not have. Now, I was already trying to find out how to be the best copywriter. And I was reading historic stuff. I was reading John Caples and Bruce Barton and books in the 1800s on writing advertising. I
Yeah.
mean, I was collecting and devouring and absorbing and trying to find out what really works when it comes to copy. And I was learning. But I was also piecing together something else, something new, something different, and something that would help separate me from the competition. And what I realized was, first of all, I was fascinated with hypnosis and had been since the 1960s when I was a kid experimenting, putting my neighbor into a trance, and
Yeah.
then he would try to put me into a trance. And so I had a love for hypnosis. And some of my gurus and heroes were people like Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson was known to speak to the unconscious. And he would do it in this kind of rambling
Yeah.
storytelling form, but he can get there and plant a seed. And I thought, that could be useful to me as a copywriter. And then I had a love for literature. And I was reading Jack London, who wrote The Call of the Wild and White Fang and Sea
Oh, yeah.
Wolf, 50 some books. He deeply influenced me. And I
Mm.
wondered, how did he write his books to be so captivating? Because the secret to writing great literature could be useful in copywriting. And then, of course, I was studying copywriting. And John Caples was one of my heroes back then. And I was collecting all of his books. I think he really just honed in on what works. And along the way, you discover Dan Kennedy and Gary Halbert and some of the names, Eugene Swartz, that maybe people know, maybe they don't know today. And I was applying that. So I was taking this hypnosis seed, literature seed, and copywriting seed, and I put them all together in what I called hypnotic writing. This became a new art form. It was an art and science. Also, I knew I needed a product. And so I published Hypnotic Writing as a spiral bound book. I didn't go to a printer. There was no Amazon print on demand.
Yeah.
Amazon was coming
Yeah.
out of the woods at that point, or growing at that point. It was being birthed at that point. But I went to Kinko's, is what we had back then. The Kinko's print on demand. And I would print spiral bound copies of this thing that I called Hypnotic Writing. And Hypnotic Writing had a bunch of very short chapters in it on how to write hypnotically. And this ended up being a bestseller. I would give these small talks. I was very shy, very introverted, and it was hard to speak. But people liked what I had to say about hypnotic writing. They would buy the book. And then along the way, Mark Joyner, one of the great internet pioneers, a longtime friend of mine, was haunting me, wanting something that he could sell as an ebook. And I didn't give it to him for the longest time because I thought, nobody's going to buy an ebook. Who would want an ebook? I
So
want a
much for
real
that
book.
idea.
Yeah, so much for that. I finally gave him hypnotic writing and said, go have fun, just thinking he'd fail and I would prove myself right. Well, he sold like crazy. And
Mm.
hypnotic writing became my first ebook. So hypnotic writing as a book, as a concept, as an ebook, and as something that separated me from the crowd ended up being the stroke of genius. I still love the book. It's in print as a paperback. People can get it on Amazon. I picked it up just the other day and started flipping through it, and I was in awe of some of the ideas that are now 3 decades old. Reading about Milton Erickson and how to put people into what's called a waking trance and how
Mm.
to create a story that's captivating. I mean, that book has helped more people, whether they wanted to write their own book, write a sales letter, write their dissertation, or write a copywriting piece. Hypnotic writing has helped them. It's been a long journey, but a great bliss in thinking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, and it's one of the classics of copywriting and required reading. It was one of the many books that we had on the shelf when I was on the team at Mind Valley.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like I said before, it's one of the great influences on my own writing. Because I could barely remember the book itself because it was so long ago, but I've definitely adopted those hypnotic writing patterns into my writing, and I sort of do them on autopilot now. So they're embedded in me. I basically hypnotized myself into writing these patterns.
Well, the book itself is an example of hypnotic writing.
Yeah,
When you read the book, I am installing those concepts in
yeah,
you. And so it's a fun read, it's a breezy read, it's a simple read, and at the same time, you're grasping everything below the conscious awareness. Consciously, you're kind of entertained and intrigued, but subconsciously, in your unconscious mind, you absorb the techniques and the patterns. And as you say, they show up in your writing without thinking about it.
yeah. It's on complete autopilot now, and I can't for the life of me remember sitting down reading the book, but I know that I did, and I know that I applied the lessons, and I know that I write that way today. So it works.
I,
It still
I,
works. You mentioned it's over 3 decades old, but some things are timeless like that. It's not like it's something that worked for 5 years. It's like
no.
it'll continue to work for another 300 years.
Well, yeah, I think this is a mistake people make when they look. They're distracted by all the techie wizardry
Yeah,
that's out there, the gadgets, the apps, the tools.
AI.
I want to check them out. But when you strip everything down, there's some key principles and key insights that have worked since the beginning of time, work now, and will work throughout the rest of history in the future because it's human nature. We're dealing with human nature. There may be apps and shortcuts and hacks and technology that can help you implement them, but at the same time, those basic concepts are unchanged.
Yeah, people are always people, and a buyer's always been a buyer. I mean, it's a lot of the persuasion principles that you and I use and teach worked for literally forever. Ancient Babylon, they found different marketing pieces back then, which use the same things that we use to persuade people now.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly the case. That we're all responding to emotional appeal. We're all responding to these psychological triggers. We all have some basic desires. I'll tell you, there was a book that deeply influenced me. It's harder to get now, mostly because I've told so many people about it that there's been a rush on the book, and it's rare. But it's called The Magic Power of Emotional Appeal, and it's by Roy Garn, Garn. And the magic power of emotional appeal is all about these 4 or 5 key concepts, the trigger points that everybody wants. And there's things like romance, there's things like health, there's things like security in there. I don't remember all of them, but I do know that whenever I wrote copy and I thought about what is the emotional trigger for this particular audience and kept that in mind, I would do staggeringly well. Instead of just being all over the place and trying to throw everything including the kitchen sink, into a sales letter, trying to hope that something will ignite that trigger and make somebody buy whatever it is you're offering, I'd hone in on the magic power of emotional appeal, hone in on what this particular audience would want. And when I did that, I'm targeted. And what Roy Garn was pointing out is those basic core desires have been with us since the beginning of time. Everybody has wanted security. They've all wanted health. They've all wanted relationship. They've all wanted recognition. They all want these different things, some more importantly than others, but they wanted these things. These were life and death. They were pretty much survival oriented in order to get us through our lives and feel like we accomplished something. So I always went back to that, the magic power of emotional appeal, Roy Garn.
Yeah, I haven't seen the book, so I'm definitely going to get that right after this call. So thanks for that. I wanted to also touch on the subject of AI as well.
Yeah.
That's the time we're living in as well. And from my
Got a few things
experience,
to say about that. That's why I'm
right,
already chuckling.
yeah. So in my experience, one of the shortcomings of AI is it can't connect with people. It doesn't feel, it can't make that same connection that you were just speaking about with the core desires of your prospects. So yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask how you use it. What are your thoughts on that, and how you use it, if at all?
I do use it. I use it as an experiment. I use it mostly for brainstorming. I use it for kickstarting ideas. I use it to help me get a first draft going. But here's the caution that I want to give everybody. Anybody can go to ChatGPT or any of the AI services and programs that are out there and say, write me a sales letter for whatever it happens to be. And it will instantly come back with a sales letter. The problem is, how do you know that it's any good? Unless you are a copywriter, you will not have the perception, the eyes, the experience, the education to be able to review it and say, oh, this sucks. This is mediocre. This is average.
Yeah.
The equivalent is, because I'm in my 70s, I'm looking at redoing my will and things like that. If I go to ChatGPT and say, hey, write my will, and it'll come back with a will. I won't know if it'll hold up in court. I'm not an attorney. And most likely it will not. Now, God, I've got so many things to talk about with AI. When there was a big rush for it a year or so ago, when it was becoming more public and it was more in the news, I went in and started experimenting with it, and I did a little research with it. And I remember I was asking about a particular song. You mentioned I'm a musician, and so I do love songs and writing and recording. And I was looking for a particular song, and ChatGPT came back with this pretty long research paper about a song. And I got excited, going, my God, this is brilliant. And it had resources in there, and there was one in particular I really wanted the book it referenced. So I jumped off ChatGPT, went to Amazon to get the book, wasn't there. Then I went to eBay because I thought, well, maybe it's out of print. It wasn't there. Then I went to some of my out-of-print resources and typed in the title. It wasn't there. I went back to ChatGPT and said, can you confirm this book? Long story short, it said, oh, we made a mistake. That book does not exist. I'm like, what? And then there's the cases of attorneys who have actually used it to write some of their papers to present in court. And some of the material that the AI used was fabricated. It was fictional. I think ChatGPT is useful for writing fiction because there's no facts that you have to check. And I think it's useful to brainstorm ideas and kickstart a first draft. But I wouldn't stop there. I would not turn my brain over to it. I would not bow to it and say, oh my God, it just gave me the sales letter. You have no idea if that's any good or not until you actually review it, especially with a copywriter's view of what works. And then, of course, as you and I both know, the only real test is to put it out into the marketplace and find out, does anybody send you money?
Yeah.
So let me say one more thing, because this whole AI thing is fascinating and repulsive. But in my case, that's kind of where I started. So let me go back. I said I was learning to be a copywriter. This is in the mid-1990s. And it was because my first book, 1984, that book came out, didn't do that well. I discovered copywriting. I started learning about copywriting. I started learning about writing sales letters. I started writing sales letters. I'm doing fairly well at it because I'm relentless at trying to improve myself with that idea. And one of the first products I sold with a sales letter was called ThoughtLine. ThoughtLine is an artificial intelligence DOS program from the 1990s. You're talking about as simple as can be, because you load the program with a disk and it'll come up and say, what's your topic? And you type it in. And then it'll just say, oh, what do you want to know about? And it fills in the gap with what you just wrote. And so it's very clumsy. It's very mechanical. But for that time period, it was exhilarating and it was fun. And it almost felt alive. Well, I wrote a sales letter to sell ThoughtLine. I met in a mailing list, printed the letter before the internet, remember, and mailed it out, and then went about my struggling life. And I remember going to the post office, and you hear these stories all the time, and I open it up, and there was a check. There was a check. I think it was $165, which for me at that time, I had been homeless. I had been in poverty. $165 was $1 million. It was my first taste of blood. It was like, copywriting works. Copywriting works. So ironically, my very first success that I can remember as a copywriter was selling an early DOS AI program called ThoughtLine. And the whole story is in my book, Hypnotic Writing.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's come full circle back to there again.
Yes, and here we are.
Yeah, the problem is that copywriting, especially when it comes to AI, has been sold as a drop dead simple business opportunity. You know, you copy and paste ChatGPT, and then suddenly you've got all these copywriting clients. But that's obviously not the case. If you don't know what good copy looks like, then how are you going to know what's going to work? Yeah,
you're going to be dazzled by the fact that you have an instantaneous sales letter, and it will be a sales letter. It will be a sales letter. My experience has been they're all mediocre. They're all average or below average. All of the stuff that I've been seeing coming out of AI in terms of people writing copy and marketing documents and websites, you do get copy and marketing documents and websites, but they're poor. They are mediocre to average. They do not excel. They do not surpass what you and I could do. And so for that reason alone, we can't turn our brains over to it.
Yeah, exactly right. And I use AI the exact same way as you. It's great for ideas. It's great for giving me ideas that I haven't thought of, angles that I haven't thought of, for different perspectives, brainstorming, and some basic writing and stuff. But anything that I write for clients is 100% my own writing. So I mean, myself, when I've tried to write with ChatGPT or any of the other AI platforms, it takes me just as long, you know, to go through that copy that's produced and fix all the stuff that I want to fix. You know, I might as well have just written it myself in the first place. So the speed that they talk about is not there for me.
Yeah, there's no time shortening factor there. I have experienced the very same thing. If I do get a sales letter back from ChatGPT and I review it and there's elements of it I like, I start working with it, I start massaging it, and before you know it, I'm writing my own sales letter anyway.
Right.
So to get a kickstart, to get that first draft, I think it's useful, but
Hmm.
you can't just accept it the way it is. You got to work with it, and ultimately you're putting in your own time and brain to make it better, to make it the
Yeah.
best.
Yeah, yeah, but it all comes back to that human connection and emotion that we're talking about before the AI doesn't have, and this
Yeah.
is what forms the basis of all the copy that we've written over the years.
You know, that's a really good point. That's reminding me when I was studying John Caples and Bruce Barton and some of the early copywriters and marketers from the turn of the 1900s, and they worked for the BBDO, the Batten, Barton, Durston, and Osborne agency. And I wrote about this in Hypnotic Writing, and I wrote about it in another book of mine called The 7 Lost Secrets of Success. And what I'm getting at is that these people infused sincerity in their copy. And it's one of the things that I noticed, that when I'm in love with a product or service that I'm going to write copy about, with Thoughtline, I was hypnotized by Thoughtline. I loved
Yeah,
Thoughtline.
yeah,
I thought Thoughtline was like a leading edge breakthrough gift from God at that point in time. I mean, genuinely excited and enthused. It showed in my writing.
Mm.
That's the difference. ChatGPT is not going to come back with a excited, human, passionate sincerity, because it's just on one level just a machine.
Yeah.
But when you and I, and it's one of my rules of thumb, is I can't write copy for something I don't believe in. I know some copywriters can. It's a mechanical process for them, and they can drum it up. They're getting paid, and they're gunslingers in a way, just using their words.
Yeah.
But I can't do that, and I think it's one of my secrets to success in virtually everything I do. I'm only sharing what I truly believe in, and that concept, that one word, sincerity,
Yeah.
that makes the difference in great copy, and AI does not have it.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't see a way that it ever will, because it's always going to be a machine. No matter how complicated the programs get, it's never going to be an actual living human being with flaws and emotions like us. You know, it's never going to be the same.
It's not going to be the same, but there will be the illusion of sameness.
Yeah.
And we can fall for that,
Yeah.
because as soon as, and Thoughtline with the DOS program did this, as soon as it uses your name, Dale Carnegie taught this to us.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as you use another person's name, you're starting to create a rapport. It's not
Yeah.
even real yet, because you don't know the other person. You know, Brian?
Yeah.
But Brian,
Right.
when I use Thoughtline and it says, "Hey, Joe, what is on your mind today?" Suddenly it feels like I'm talking to what could be a person.
Back then it was insane.
AI does something even similar to that, because it's a little bit more polished and it's a little quicker and not as mechanical as Thoughtline was. But it's not actually real. It's just the illusion is there.
Yeah, yeah. My ChatGPT called me Tim for like the first 3 months for some reason. Which I don't know where I got that from, but
well, let me tell you a quick story about ChatGPT from just a few days ago. And if you follow me on Instagram, you probably saw the video where I pointed this out. Because as you know, and you already mentioned it, when I turned 71, I enrolled in MMA classes, mixed martial arts, and I'm going twice a week. I got my gold belt. I'm being tested for the orange belt in a week or so. And I announced to the world, I want to have my black belt by the time I'm 75. I'm giving myself 4 years. And then I thought, well, what I need, and this is what I teach in the law of attraction and the secret and the mind power and visualization, I need a graphic. I need a visual. So I went to ChatGPT as a test. And I said, ChatGPT, please create a visual drawing a photo of me receiving my black belt in 2029, age 75. And I'm in my black gi, I got my hands on my hip. I gave it the parameters, and I didn't know what I would get back.
Yeah.
And what I got back was pretty cool. There was me, a little bit older, and standing there, and a big sign said, Joe Vitale receives black belt, age 75, 2029. And I loved it, except a word was misspelled. Instead of saying receives, it said beceives. Joe Vitale beceives black belt. And I went, how in the hell does the AI program make a stupid misspelling like that? I even put the word receives.
Yeah.
It changed it to beceives. And so it's another example of making a stupid mistake. And if you're not watching it, you'll just let it pass. And then you're going to look like the idiot. Because of my training in self-help and because of what I teach in books like The Attractor Factor, I always look for, how can I turn it into something good? And I looked at the beceives and I thought, that's actually possibly a new coined word that is relevant. And so I thought, beceives is now a new word. unknown AI. It didn't know what it was doing. I'm the one putting meaning on this.
Yeah.
Deceives means I am being the person who is receiving his black belt at age 75.
Yeah,
now deceives becomes a new word I can use in talking about how to create your reality. Oh, how do you manifest what you want? How do you use the secret? It's like, well, you start to deceive it.
Yeah.
How do you deceive it? You pretend you already have it. You be the receiver of it. New word. But it came from a stupid error that ChatGPT made.
Yeah, that's amazing. It didn't quite give you what you asked for, but it accidentally gave you something even better.
Well, only because I turned it into something better.
Yeah.
It didn't know what it was doing, and I'm still appalled. I'm appalled with the first story I told you about the music in the book. It made up a book. It's part of research material. It's like people would be thrown out of school if they did that on exams. And we're letting ChatGPT do it.
Well, I guess students in school are probably using ChatGPT in every class now, I imagine. But I always ask it to cite sources when it does research for me. So it's less prone. I'm not saying it doesn't do it. It doesn't hallucinate things, but it's less prone to making stuff up.
Right. I think you can have a blast just having ChatGPT create fiction for you. In fact, I did. I'll tell you one more quick story. I was experimenting with ChatGPT, and I thought, well, it's not so good at doing nonfiction. Let me try fiction. And I said, pretend Seneca, one of the great Stoics, had a meeting with Epicurus from the other school from a different time. These two never met each other. But Epicurus is the founder of the feel-good movement, and Seneca's with the Stoics, and it's like, just stay in the moment and control what you can control. And I would ask questions and tell ChatGPT, how would Seneca answer this? How would Epicurus answer this? How would Seneca answer this? Before you knew it, I had a little ebook. I put it on Amazon. I think it's called In Pursuit of Tranquility. And I openly say I didn't write it. I say it's by Joe Vitale and ChatGPT. And it's an experiment. And it's a great experiment because Seneca's dead and can't tell me what he would have said. Epicurus is dead, can't tell me what they would have said. And the whole dialogue's fictional anyway.
Yeah.
That's where ChatGPT can excel.
I think that's a great way to do it, because you're kind of positioning it almost as nonfiction, but it is actually fiction.
Yeah, it would be historical fiction.
Historical fiction. That's a good term for it.
I think that's a category. Maybe I made it up, but it's historical fiction. It's certainly fun. I had fun doing it. I actually learned a bit about what the both might say to each other, thanks to ChatGPT. And maybe more importantly, I ended up with a product that I didn't write.
And that's one of the things that one of the ways AI is sold to people is the instant products. Besides instant copy, it's also instant products. You can instantly write an ebook, and whether it's any good or not is a different story.
Right, that's the thing. And we also want to look at the fact that, and this is the bottom line reality for everything we're talking about here, even if you come up with something like I did, the ebook, Pursuit of Tranquility, Seneca and Epicurus, somebody has to market it. Somebody still has to sell it. Just because it's listed on Amazon means nothing. It's ranked like 2 million in sales, meaning not 2 million sales. It's the bottom of the list of all available products at Amazon because nobody's marketing it. So you still have to market, even if you create something with ChatGPT.
Yeah, and that's what AI can't do. That's what we need to learn. So, what about somebody who's starting out today, whether they want to be a copywriter or they want to be a marketer of info products like that? We've got AI now to help us with stuff like that. But aside from that, how do people get started on the true human emotional connection level that we've talked about? Where do they go to learn that, and how do they integrate that with AI?
Well, for me, my first approach to learning anything, and you mentioned music, I did this with music. I've done this with martial arts. When I went into strongman training, I did it with strongman training. When it was the internet, I did it with the internet. When it was learning to be a speaker and I was terrified of speaking, I did it with speaking. And what I'm getting at is that I've always gone to books. The wisdom of the world is already there. It's in books. When it comes to understanding human nature, I would read books like The Magic Power of Emotional Appeal by Roy Garn. And there was a great book by Christian Godefroy. I think that was his name, Godefroy. He was from Germany, I believe. And it was How to Write Sales Letters That Sell. And he talked about human emotions, much like the Roy Garn book did. And I'd be reading the pop psychology, the deep psychology. I'd be reading Cialdini's book, Influence. I've been reading all the books to understand how does the human mind, specifically human behavior, work. I have found, because I've read all these books from the 1800s through the 1900s and all the books that still come out today, I've sold almost all of my copywriting collection to Russell Brunson, who's been acquiring some of the greats, and he bought up my stuff. But I've always been looking at what are the key motivators. They have been discovered. They have been written about. Those are what I want to keep in mind when I write to people. How does my product or my service fulfill their emotional desire? Whatever that hot button is. So where I would be starting was with books. And there's a lot of great books. I mean, I would read Hypnotic Writing.
Yeah.
I just have to tell people it's a great book. I reread it recently. It's a great book. The book that changed my life, that talked about all of this. I mean, it changed my life. I was a copywriter before it. I was a hypnotic writer after it. Was the Robert Collier letter book. The Robert Collier letter book, it's heavenly. It was priceless to me and still is today. I still remember when I found it. I was in a bookstore in Houston. I would always go and hunt the bookstores, again, way before the internet. I had already known who Robert Collier was because as a kid, I read his metaphysical books, The Secret of the Ages, Prayer Works, and I forget all the different books he wrote. He wrote a lot of them. I didn't know he was a copywriter. And I'm in that bookstore in Houston, and there's this big, thick book, hardcover, yellow dust jacket, and it said the Robert Collier letter book. And I looked at it in awe. It's like, is this the guy?
Yeah.
Was it him? And I went up to the owner, Colleen, of Colleen's Books, and said, is this the Robert Collier with the metaphysical stuff? And she didn't know. I bought the book, devoured it. I cannot tell you how that book energized me and awakened me and taught me about how the human mind works. Robert Collier had written all the sales letters for his own books.
Yeah.
And it were great stories. And he has all the sales letters in there. And he breaks down what he's doing with the sales letters. And even though the book came out, I think in 1952, you can still find it. I think there's a paperback copy on Amazon today. You can still find it today. It's as relevant today for the very reasons you and I were talking about earlier. The key concepts, the key motivators work for people from the beginning of time and work for people now and will work for people in the future. The Robert Collier letter book is one of the first books I'd go to.
Yeah, it's a classic. All the ones I've read, most of the ones that you mentioned, all of them are great. I know that you've got a lot of books yourself at MrFire.com. You've authored an incredible number of books, and we'll come to a bit more of your stuff soon because I know that you've got something in store for our listeners here. So,
I got a juicy bonus that I put together 25 years ago. It's worth gold. I haven't even promoted it in the longest time. I went through it again today, going, "Oh my God!" And I'm giving this away. I'll tell them where it is and how to get it for free.
Is that the one that you sent me for today?
Yeah.
So I'm going to check that out because I thought that looks incredible. So it's joevitale.com/conversions.
Yes. I think it's conversion. I don't know if there's an S on it.
Oh, conversion. You're right. There's no S on the end. I'll put a link to this page on the podcast episode anyway, joevitale.com/conversion. But tell us a bit about this because I'm going to get this myself.
That is a work of art. That is a piece of gold. I put that together. There are, I think, 1,500 hypnotic phrases that you use when you're writing copy, and you insert them in different places. They can be kickstarters for your sentences. They can be transitions between paragraphs. They can be used in clever little ways on your website. You can even use it in conversation. These are the hypnotic commands that cause conversion. So in other words, we want sales. And what does that mean? We sent leads, we sent prospects there, but so what? We need them to convert.
Yeah.
And so the 1,400 and some conversions are a collection of these words and phrases that I put together over, at that time, it was probably over 20 years. And then when I first released the book, again, about 25 years ago, I didn't want to give it away. I think I listed it on Amazon for $150 or $200. And then I didn't even want to sell the ebook because I thought, I don't want people to spread this. It was too hard earned through blood, sweat, and tears. It took a long time to collect. And I've, because I'm in a different world these days, I don't do as much copywriting. I don't have people asking me about copywriting. I haven't even talked about the book in a decade or more. And so I had to go look at the website, go look at the material, and then I went, oh man, this stuff really is gold. This is gold. And Brian, folks, gets to have it for free.
Yeah, that's amazing. I really appreciate that. So thanks for that. So joevitale.com/conversion, no S on the end. And it's definitely something that you want to pick up. If anything that we've talked about today has resonated with you, this is exactly what you want. And it's something that I've got as well. It's an amazing free offer. And it's really incredible that this is not a brand new product that you released, because this is what a lot of people come on the podcast and they want to talk about their latest thing that they've released, which is fair enough. But this is, would you say, 25 years old, and it's still just as valid today?
Yeah, and I think it's more priceless. Certainly, I've got new books. I've written 90 books. I have another book. My new book is Zero Limits Living. But I don't know that that's as relevant to your audience, based on what I understand, as the conversions book would be. And so I was trying, and this is how a copywriter should be thinking anyway. I'm thinking of, what does this audience want? And this audience may not really care about some of my books or my music or my movies or some of the things I'm doing. But when it comes to something that's copywriting oriented, this audience is probably going to be interested. So I'm thinking as a copywriter going, what would be the match? And this whole conversion book is what came up. And I think I also want to point out, and this is just an acknowledgement of the power of copywriting. I really believe I owe all of my success to being a copywriter, because learning how to speak and learning how to write in a clear, concise, compelling, persuasive, hypnotic way has infused everything I do. Even when I was in the movie The Secret, I spoke as a copywriter. I don't say it. Nobody acknowledges it. You don't think that, but I'm one of the standouts. There's 25 people in that movie, and I and 3 or 4 others are the ones people are always talking about. And I and 3 or 4 others are the ones that Larry King wanted on TV, Oprah wanted on TV. I really believe it's because I speak as a copywriter. When I do interviews, even today, I tell stories for this call because I know it's hypnotically persuasive. When I'm on stages speaking, and you're in Bangkok, aren't you? I've been there twice and spoke on stage with Mike Tyson, which is a whole other story. But when I'm on stage, I think one of the reasons I seem to do well is the copywriter in me knows how to communicate it in a way that engages the audience. So whether it's on stage, whether it's speaking, it's an interview, it is writing, it is even my Instagram videos that I post almost every day, I'm doing it as a copywriter. So I really do sum it up and say, look, I'm acknowledging the God of copywriting. Thank you, because this has given me this joyful life.
That's why I try and have a wide range of guests on the show, not just copywriters or gunslingers for hire. It's all copy, whether they speak on stage or whether they do other things or whether they specialize in different kinds of marketing. It all boils down to copy. It all boils down to that human connection and persuasion. So it's a valid point.
I believe that's the case.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on, you mentioned movies before, and I know you've got a movie coming out, which you mentioned off air. So I'd love to know a bit more about that too.
I do. I finally have my own movie. I knew the power of a movie because of being in the movie The Secret. The Secret came out 20 years ago. People still talk about it. I still get stopped in the street and recognized. The movie is traveling around the world, going to countries that are just discovering it for the first time. It is mind-blowing. I also know that as much as I love books and as many books as I've written, not that many people read. More people sit in front of the TV or sit in front of their computer. So if there is a movie that delivers the same information, but now they can sit there and eat popcorn and just stare at it, they will watch that sooner. So I've wanted my own movie for a good 10 years. I've been in 30-some movies. I know how this process works. I know where people make mistakes and where they do well. And of course, the success of The Secret is educational in itself. I finally have my own movie. It's called Zero Limits. The world premiere, the VIP red carpet big deal event is going to be in Sacramento, California, June 26th. Los Angeles Tribune is going to cover it. I and members of the cast, not all of them, but a lot of them are traveling around the world to come to be there. Other local media will be there. Photographers will be there. Red carpet will be there. This is the VIP red carpet big deal. And all the info is at zerolimitsmovie.com, zerolimitsmovie.com. So if people want to be there live, you got to go get a ticket at zerolimitsmovie.com. If you want to wait, it'll be on Amazon, Apple TV, and streaming probably the end of 2025. But my middle name's impatient. If you're impatient like me, it's like, go get the VIP ticket, get your plane ticket, and get to Sacramento on June 26th.
Yes. And it's an amazing point that you make, that a movie like that is just another form of persuasion. It's just another medium to communicate a message.
It's visual copywriting. It's visual copywriting, and it is more of the trend these days. In the early days, of course, we were only writing with just words and just text. Even when I was going on the internet, being one of the first on the internet, considered a pioneer on the internet, we were text-driven.
Yeah.
Most of us were using dial-up modems then. We didn't have the video, and we certainly didn't have Zoom, and we didn't have a lot of the gadgets we have today.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Now, because of all of that today, there's more of a video drive. But what I always tell people is, what is the video doing? What am I doing right here? I'm using words. Words are the backbone. It's the alphabet. It's the nuts and bolts of copy. That's copywriting. It's just in visual form. And so I apply all of the copywriting techniques. I mentioned Instagram. I post original content virtually every day on Instagram. And it's usually a 90-second lesson in copywriting. I don't say copywriting, but I'm demonstrating copywriting. So copy rules.
Yeah, it's at everything. It's the center of everything. So one of the best ways that anyone listening to this podcast can do that is to go and get the amazing free offer that Joe has, joevitale.com/conversion. And that free book there is going to be amazing. Go and grab that immediately. So highly recommended. I'm going to do that myself, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. So thank you for coming on today, Joe. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to talk to you. And I know that we've got so much more that we can cover. We'll probably have to do this again sometime if you're available. But I've had a great time, and it's great to finally connect with you. So thanks again for everything that you've shared. It's been amazing. And joevitale.com/conversion. Where people can go. I'll post a link to that if you're listening to this show on iTunes or Spotify or YouTube. I'll post a link on the episode so you can go and grab that. So thanks again, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Anytime you like. It's been my pleasure. It's exhilarating, and I can't believe it's over already.
Thank you for listening to Geniuses of Copywriting with Brian Casangina. To get the full transcript and all the resources mentioned on today's show, go to www.geniusesofcopywriting.com now.